Washington, D.C. Here in the military cemetery lie the 7 astronauts from the Space Shuttle Columbia. 2 women and 5 men who perished in an incredible accident on their return to Earth on February 1st, 2003.
Look at the chunks coming off of it. What the heck is that?
The Columbia's lost. There are no survivors.
We're going to tell you of the tragic fate of an exceptional rocket.
C'est dans l'histoire de l'aéronautique le vaisseau probablement le plus complexe jamais imaginé.
How could a few grams of foam lead to the disintegration of this 100-ton spaceship?
It hit the orbiter at a relative velocity of about 500 miles an hour.
It was like a jackhammer hitting something.
Why couldn't the accident have been foreseen?
On every mission, 80% had some degree of foam shedding.
Why wasn't the structure reinforced?
À l'époque, on pense que c'est vraiment indestructible.
Thanks to the technical expertise of astronauts and investigators, as well as testimonies from the crew's families, we will decipher each second of Columbia's return to Earth.
I love you both. Bye.
There had never been significant problems on descent.
Columbia, Houston, UHF com check.
The hot plasma coming through the wing was the functional equivalent of a blowtorch.
Une fusée, c'est une grosse bombe potentielle.
Et puis c'est la rupture. On n'a plus aucun contact.
Laura's holding on to me and she said, "Is Daddy okay?" And tell her, no, I don't think he is.
We're going to try to work out how the Shuttle Columbia, flagship of the U.S. Space Initiative, could turn into a fireball that was out of control.
It was the worst, I mean literally the worst day of my life.
January 2003, Cape Canaveral, NASA's launch base in Florida. A gigantic building of 3.6 million cubic centimeters, a volume that could accommodate more than 100,000 containers. Here, astronauts on the next space mission try on their spacesuits. It's a solemn moment, especially for those going into space for the first time, as is the case for flight surgeon Laura Clark.
I don't need longer, like that part longer. So this part is just a little lower. So if it was just here.
Jonathan Clark is Laurel's husband. He remembers his wife's joy at being selected for this mission.
The first time she applied in 1994, she was pregnant, very big, and they didn't take her, but they still went through the selection. The next cycle was 1996, and she was selected. So she was unbelievably excited.
Alongside astronaut Clark, those who would share the 16-day mission, an exclusively scientific assignment to analyze the effects of microgravity on living organisms. Philippe Perrin knew the mission crew very well. The French astronaut trained alongside them at NASA.
C'était au départ un groupe de copains. Il y avait à son bord le premier astronaute israélien, Ilan Ramon. Il y avait le copilote Willie McCool, qui était un de mes proches. Il y avait aussi une américaine d'origine indienne et experte en bras robotiques, Kalpana. Il y avait un autre garçon qui était de ma promo quand on a rejoint la NASA quelques années avant, David. Et puis Mike, un ancien. Et c'était un équipage avec qui j'avais eu en fait une grande envie de voler.
Leading the crew was astronaut Rick Husband, aged 45. This was his second manned flight, his first as commander.
He felt it was a huge honor to be the commander, and it's a very unusual thing. But before the launch, he called each of the parents of the crew members and told them what a blessing it had been to have their son or daughter in the crew. and how honored he was to fly in space with them. And so he really made a contact with all the families. It was truly a family, all of us.
All right, our fearless leader. Time to get comfy. You got your 9% off. All right.
They spend a lot of time working together on the various activities that are going to be expected when they're on orbit.
Don't make any mistakes because you're surrounded by visual.
C'était une mission scientifique, de recherche en apesanteur, on dit aussi parfois en microgravité.
A mission more than 2 years in preparation. Initially planned for 2001, it had been postponed 13 times.
They were frustrated, of course, to always see a postponement anytime that there was a circumstance that arose that made some other scheduling imperative.
But by January 2003, NASA no longer had any choice. It had to launch soon for budgetary reasons. A date was sought, but it wasn't that simple.
Il faut que l'ensemble des conditions météo soient bonnes au niveau visibilité et également au niveau du vent de travers.
The slightest gust of wind could destabilize the shuttle on takeoff. So NASA engineers carefully monitored their weather forecasting tools to anticipate the weather in Florida and elsewhere. In case of problems during takeoff, the shuttle would be diverted to other landing strips. Among them, 2 in Spain and 1 in France at Istres, near Marseille. The latter was 5 kilometers long, the longest landing strip in Europe. While engineers were selecting the perfect day for takeoff, a few kilometers away, the space shuttle left its hangar to journey to the launch pad.
Alors il y a un crawler, qui est un système avec des chenilles, qui va aller tout doucement vers le pas de tir pour être prêt au décollage. C'est impressionnant, c'est extrêmement impressionnant. Ça va très très lentement, mais c'est un engin vraiment très très grand.
With a top speed of 1.1 kilometers per hour, weighing 2,700 tons, this monster on tracks made its way to the launch pad, carrying the world's most famous space shuttle. Its name was Columbia, a pioneer of manned flight, a technological marvel, yet one with a major handicap. To fully appreciate it, we must return to its original design.
Sunday, April 12, 1981. Kennedy Space Center, Florida. The Space Shuttle.
April 12, 1981 was an historic day for NASA. Buoyed by the success of the Apollo missions in the 60s, the U.S. Space Agency wanted to build a kind of laboratory in space, the ISS, or International Space Station. A colossal project that would require many trips between Earth and space. NASA had to find another way than single-use rockets. John Logsdon had been an aerospace historian for over 40 years. He remembers the start of the project very well.
Well, at the beginning of the program, the thought was that the shuttle would be like an airplane. You could just kind of land, do a little turnaround, and take off again. The plan was for 5 orbiters that it would do 50 to 60 missions a year, basically 1 a week.
Several space shuttle prototypes were examined. The orbiter concept was chosen. A kind of space freighter capable of carrying both payloads and astronauts.
Primarily it was designed to accommodate 7 crew, 4 at the flight deck, 3 at the mid-deck. There was not a whole lot of extra space that was designed for that. Everything else was primarily the cargo compartment that had doors at the top of it that would open up to expose the entirety of the whole cargo bay.
An outer aluminum structure and a storage capacity of 25 tons, the equivalent of 20 cars. The first orbiter was called Columbia.
C'est dans l'histoire de l'aéronautique le vaisseau probablement le plus complexe jamais imaginé.
Il faut imaginer la beauté de quelque chose qui décolle comme une fusée et qui se pose comme un avion. C'est absolument extraordinaire.
April 12, 1981. The engineers at NASA hold their breath. They will finally see whether, after a decade of research and a budget of millions, their shuttle will take off.
8, 7, 6, 5, 4. We've gone for main engine start.
In Florida, Columbia takes off with ease. But everyone here knows it's a prelude to another challenge. Landing the shuttle without mishap, more easily said than done.
It's one of the most challenging aspects, absolutely. You have to protect from extreme heat up to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit on re-entry.
To counter this problem, the engineers devised a thermal shield, the black part under the orbiter.
Jusqu'à présent, on utilisait quelque chose qu'on appelle ablatif, c'est-à-dire que la protection se dissout et répartit la chaleur tout en se détruisant, en s'auto-détruisant en quelque sorte. Alors que là, on va réutiliser le véhicule. Ça veut dire que on va utiliser un tout autre système à base de tuiles.
The thermal protection system was composed of 24,300 silica tiles under the shuttle's belly, capable of withstanding temperatures of 1,000 degrees. For the nose cap and leading edges, reinforced carbon tiles were used. These panels can withstand temperatures of 1,600 degrees. The first flight returned to Earth without a hitch. The thermal protection system seemed indestructible. Yet it was the space shuttle's major weakness, a weakness that would prove fatal 20 years later. Return to Cape Canaveral in Florida. Takeoff of mission STS-107 was scheduled for Thursday, January 16, 2003.
Absolutely perfect day to launch. There was not a cloud in the sky. It was a gorgeous January day in Florida. There was no precipitation and no difficulties at all.
At the time, Sean O'Keefe held the position of administrator. He was the number 2 in NASA. Though conditions seemed perfect for the launch, Sean O'Keefe was worried.
It was so soon after the September 11th, 2001 incidents. NASA, I think, and all the law enforcement agencies, the Coast Guard, everybody was very much on high alert.
Security was beefed up, as each space shuttle launch attracted crowds of spectators.
C'est un événement extrêmement important et extrêmement supporté par les Américains. Vous avez des personnes qui viennent en camping-car des semaines à l'avance et qui attendent jusqu'à ce que le décollage se fasse.
On January 16, 2003 at 7 a.m., 3 hours before takeoff, the astronauts left their headquarters to applause recorded by the TV cameras.
They get on the bus, and it's a couple-mile drive to the launch pad.
Les anciens blagues en chahut encore, etc. Et plus on se rapproche du pas de tir, plus le silence se fait lourd, chacun se concentre.
5 kilometers away, the astronauts' families took their place on the roof of a NASA building.
There's only a few people up there. It's just family and senior officials. And it's a great view.
With Jonathan was Evelyn Husband, wife of Mission Commander Rick Husband. Their 2 children were with her.
That it's a fearful time. I mean, it's pretty spectacular to watch someone you love launch on a rocket, on a space rocket. So that's a pretty intense time.
1 hour before takeoff, NASA was broadcasting the crew boarding live.
You can see Commander Rick Husband, the first to enter the orbiter, as is the tradition.
The pressure was intensifying.
Une fois que vous êtes installé dans la navette, c'est toujours un astronaute au dernier moment qui vérifie que vous êtes bien sanglé sur votre siège, que toutes les connexions sont bien faites. La porte d'accès se ferme dans le pont inférieur. Et les techniciens s'éloignent. Et vous savez qu'à plusieurs kilomètres à la ronde, il n'y a pas d'autres êtres humains que vous-même. Il n'y a personne parce qu'une fusée, c'est une grosse bombe potentielle.
Is roughly equivalent to a small nuclear device.
That it is a controlled explosion. Everyone is nervous.
Houston, flight is go.
An accident some years previous haunted the world of space travel.
Mila, NTD, verify, ready to resume com.
17 years earlier, almost to the day, January 28, 1986, the shuttle Challenger took off with 7 astronauts aboard. Just 72 seconds after liftoff, a fault in the booster seals caused an explosion. An explosion that killed the whole crew. Columbia was a well-oiled machine. This was its 28th mission into space. It held the record for the longest time in orbit, more than 300 hours. And that has technical consequences.
Les matériaux vieillissent et c'est un vrai casse-tête avec des budgets qui diminuent de garder un niveau de sécurité.
A bigger headache in that Columbia required considerable energy. To get into orbit, the shuttle must reach 28,000 kilometers per hour in under 9 minutes. 3,000 tons of thrust are needed to take off, which is 25 times more than an Airbus A380. To achieve this, the shuttle has the 2 most powerful boosters in the world affixed to it.
Boosters provided 2.65 million pounds of thrust.
70% de la puissance vient des boosters à poudre. Et les boosters à poudre ont une combustion qui est extrêmement violente.
The remaining 30% is generated by Columbia's 3 engines at the rear of the orbiter. They are fueled by a huge external tank containing over 2 million liters of hydrogen and oxygen. The whole thing is protected by this layer of orange foam.
Orange was the color of the insulation that was put on the tank to protect the rest of the system from the very cold temperatures and keep the fuel at a very low temperature. It's like a cooler for beverages that you would take on a picnic. So it's full of air. It is not a dense material.
But this foam had one peculiarity. Owing to the huge aerodynamic force on takeoff, small pieces tend to be ripped off and hit the shuttle. At first glance, nothing to worry anybody.
There had been 112 before STS-107. 80% had some degree of foam shedding. So it was a very common occurrence on every mission.
There would always be some scarring, as in sections where it had been cut into those tiles going along. They were easily repaired. The reinforced carbon on the leading edges typically was very resistant to any strikes.
The countdown begins. The shuttle is ready to take off. Within a few seconds, the 3 engines
10,
will ignite.
9, 8, 7. We have a go for main engine start.
Measures are taken to ward off the deafening noise.
Un bruit énorme, on parle de 168 décibels. Le corps humain est tout à fait incapable de supporter ça. Et donc on lâche des milliers de litres d'eau pour amortir ce bruit.
Later, after they've been checked out, the solids fire. Once the solids fire, you're leaving.
3, 2, 1. We have booster ignition and liftoff of Space Shuttle Columbia with a multitude of national and international space research experiments.
On January 16, 2003 at 10:39, Columbia leaves its Florida base. Inside the shuttle, the astronauts are subjected to considerable acceleration.
The space shuttle goes 0 to 3,000 miles an hour in 30 seconds.
And he said, well, it was the equivalent of driving along and then being struck by an 18-wheeler truck driving at over 100 miles per hour.
C'est en fait au départ beaucoup de vibrations.
Tellement de vibrations que Dans les premières 30 secondes, il est difficile de lire les instruments sur les écrans.
On the ground, the astronauts' families were initially apprehensive.
It's pretty spectacular to watch a shuttle launch, and the most amazing part of it is there's a delayed amount of time before the sound wave comes.
You see it and it's like, and then, you know, maybe 5 seconds later, you hear it and feel it. And you feel it. You feel it rumble in your stomach.
A shockwave also felt by Jonathan Clark's 6-year-old son, Ian.
He's with me by my side, and he's crying. He was very worried. So what I had to do was to try to now spend time with him, reassuring him that it was going to be okay.
The shuttle was by now moving at 8,000 kilometers per hour and entering the most critical phase of the launch.
The pressures on the shuttle, and at that point, it's the whole thing, the two solids, the external tank and the orbiter, are the greatest. And this is called the maximum dynamic pressure, or max Q.
It was during this period of max Q that Challenger exploded. But here on the NASA control screens, Columbia seemed to be holding up fine.
It's away from solid rocket booster separation, everything looking good on board Columbia.
2 minutes after takeoff, the shuttle shed its boosters and continued its ascent.
Les propulseurs à poudre s'écartent, on redescend à 1G, et tout doucement on accélère, on accélère, on accélère. On sent que la poussée dans le dos augmente, augmente. Et en face de nous, c'est le noir d'encre, même quand on décolle en plein jour.
Then it was the external tank's turn to separate from the shuttle. After 8 minutes and 30 seconds, the shuttle reached a speed of 28,000 kilometers per hour, fast enough to allow it to remain in orbit around the Earth. The takeoff was a success. Columbia was in orbit 280 kilometers above the Earth.
Everything appeared to be well in order, and the crew was excited to now be in orbit and ready to prepare for their mission.
Commander Rick Husband spoke to his base.
And watch out for the sun over there. It is bright. It is really bright. That's what I was looking for. Thank you, Rick.
Everything seemed fine, yet what nobody knew at that point was that the shuttle was seriously damaged. They wouldn't find out until the following day. The Marshall Mission Center, 1,000 kilometers from the launch base. This is home to the engineers in technical charge of the mission. January 17th, they reviewed Columbia's liftoff, a systematic procedure. Nobody in the room was particularly worried. The first tapes confirmed operations were running smoothly. When suddenly, they noticed a detail. 81.9 seconds after liftoff, something seemed to break off the external tank, hit the shuttle, and end up as dust. Paul Wild is an engineer with the FAA, the Federal Aerospace Administration. He was convinced that the object was a piece of insulation foam like this one.
So this is an actual sample of foam, and you can see the outside is rough, and it's a couple of pounds per cubic foot.
A piece of foam that was anything but harmless.
That foam came off of what we call the bipod ramp. There's two big connectors in between the orbiter and the external tank. The foam was as big as a small suitcase, 6 inches by 10 inches and 16 inches long.
That size, it is substantial. It's probably one of the bigger examples of foam shedding in the history of the program.
The piece of foam passed Columbia's belly and hit the port wing when the shuttle was flying at 3,600 kilometers per hour, 3 times the speed of sound.
It hit the orbiter at a relative velocity of about 500 miles an hour.
No one could imagine it then, but the impact was considerable.
It was approximately 2,000 pounds of force.
It was like a jackhammer hitting something.
Created a hole about this big.
At that point, it was hard to be certain that Columbia's wing was pierced. Of the 12 cameras on the launch pad, only 2 captured the falling foam, and the engineers were unable to identify the exact spot of the impact.
It wasn't immediately clear where it hit. Initial analyses indicated that it probably hit more down by the landing gear on the tiles.
Another worrying aspect compounded the uncertainty. The mission continued in space without the crew being informed of the engineers' doubts about the possible damage to the shuttle. But on day 3 of the mission, an Army radar detected an unusual movement. Something had fallen off the shuttle. Unfortunately, the engineers didn't receive this data at the time. They only had the launch videos.
They didn't know exactly what they were seeing, just that there was some sort of debris that was liberated.
Some of the engineers did kind of, that doesn't seem exactly right. Had a kind of engineering intuition that there may well be a problem. The fear was if there was a hole in the wing, basically you're dead.
NASA technicians then tried something they had never done before.
Un conseil de techniciens se réunit au 5e et au 6e jour de la mission pour prendre justement une décision et voir ce qu'on pourrait faire de malin. Alors ce qu'on peut faire de plus malin, c'est de prendre une photo.
On January 21st, 2003, the technicians warned their boss in Houston. He understood their concerns and emailed his superiors with this unprecedented request. The email clearly stated that without a better photo, it was impossible to determine the damage precisely. The manager asked permission to use a military satellite to take a photo.
It was not a simple thing to reprogram intelligence satellites.
Faire tourner un satellite ou faire tourner un télescope pour aller voir un hypothétique problème serait là encore engager des millions de dollars pour quelque chose qu'on jugeait impossible, voire improbable.
NASA reacted with skepticism, particularly since the foam problem was well known.
The particular problem of the bipod ramp foam had been observed to come off approximately 10% of the time.
There was relatively low risk that this was going to be any more unusual, anomalous, risky, or dangerous than any other foam strike that occurred on every other flight.
The answer was swift.
Donc la décision est prise, et elle est très étrange, de ne pas prendre de photos de la navette.
Unwittingly, management had just compromised the astronauts' chances of survival. For the debris recorded by the Army was a part of the shuttle.
En fait, c'est la partie qui manque dans le bord d'attaque et c'est la partie qui a été arrachée au décollage.
Mais à ce moment-là, donc personne n'en a conscience.
Nobody. Certainly not the crew members.
Hey, Alpha, this is Columbia. How you doing over there?
We're doing great. We're so glad to see you guys made it into orbit.
Yeah, we're glad to be here too. Everybody.
Some 280 kilometers away, they continued their mission, still oblivious to what was going on. For as incredible as it may seem, no alarm system in the cockpit had been activated, despite the 26 sensors on the port wing.
None of those appeared to be abnormal.
The sensors were designed to measure fundamental quantities like temperature, strain, but not the presence of a hole.
Not until January 23rd, a week after takeoff, did NASA chiefs decide to email a warning to the Columbia's commander, Rick Husband.
They told Rick there was a foam strike during launch, but it's inconsequential and we're not worried about it.
This is the email. It clearly says that the impact on the wing presented no risk to the crew or to the shuttle's re-entry. The commander could only trust what his superiors had told him.
On a une confiance énorme entre les astronautes et les managers de la NASA. Donc le chef de vol a dit « Vous inquiétez pas, il n'y a pas de conséquences graves ». Les astronautes faisaient confiance.
Mais l'équipage n'a aucun moyen de vérifier en fait l'étendue des dégâts. Il n'y a pas de caméra, il n'y a pas de bras robotiques, il n'y a pas de sortie extravéhiculaire à ce moment-là qui permettent d'aller voir la nature de l'impact.
Jonathan Clark is the husband of astronaut Laurel Clark. Back then, he also worked at Mission Control in Houston as a flight surgeon. He heard his colleagues' fears.
They're worried about this foam, even though they told the crew it's no big deal.
He had no choice but to keep quiet.
We're not allowed to talk about things outside of the normal chain of communications. So I could have done it, but it would have been, you know, basically saying, hey, you guys have a problem, then they start getting worried. So I made a decision to follow the rules and not talk to them about the problem.
Aboard Columbia, thinking all was well, the crew was hard at work.
They're up there to work, and they work really long hours. Might be 18-hour days, and you know, they're doing science experiments and different projects and things like that, one after the other. It's actually hard work. I mean, sometimes they don't even remember to eat because they're working so hard.
Between scientific experiments, the crew enjoyed their weightlessness.
Wow, Willie, that was impressive. What else?
That's a bump, right? And then there's a spike.
And then there's tennis.
Tennis.
Particularly during conference calls with family.
She could, you know, spin around on the camera, so you're watching her and she's like twirling around and stuff, and her hair's all fluffed out. And Ian, my son, was very, always kidding her and joking with her. And they're really fun. We do them for about 15 or 20 minutes, and we do that once a week.
He absolutely loved being in space, and so he would talk to us about floating and do silly little tricks for the kids that they thought was so much fun with water and with M&Ms. And I think he did a flip one time for us just to show us what that was like.
Seeing these pictures, it's impossible to imagine that the crew's lives hung in the balance. On the ground, some engineers worried despite their management's decision. But without a satellite photo, it was hard to confirm their fears.
Then a whole drama begins to play out, where we have NASA engineers trying to identify whether there is a problem, but not being able to access any data. So they start making extrapolations.
But some mistakes were made that compromised their analysis. First mistake, the impact zone of the foam on the wing.
It hit on panel number 8 of the RCC.
Back then, it was inconceivable that a piece of foam could damage that part of the wing.
Un RCC, c'est indestructible. À l'époque, on pense que c'est vraiment indestructible. Pourquoi? Ça a des propriétés. À la fois, c'est extrêmement léger, c'est extrêmement résistant, c'est plusieurs couches de carbone. C'est ce qui se fait de mieux.
Everybody during the mission thought the most likely impact occurred on the tiles, not on the RCC.
To evaluate potential damage to the tiles, the engineers used some software called Crater. But here again, the available tools were misleading.
The problem with Crater is it's designed to assess the impact of very small objects.
Crater only analyzed debris several millimeters wide, 400 times smaller than the piece of foam that hit Columbia.
So it was an inappropriate application of existing software, but there wasn't anything else.
These successive assessments led to an erroneous result and dramatic consequences. On January 24th, a meeting was held to address all questions linked to mission STS-107. Among the 7 people present, Don McCormick, head of the team studying the foam impact on Columbia, and flight director Linda Ham. A recording of the meeting shows how the results of the crater software were analyzed.
The thermal analysis does not indicate that there's a potential for a burn through. So it's difficult.
Burn through means no catastrophic damage.
Right.
So the localized heating damage would mean a tile replacement.
It would mean possible impacts to turnaround repairs and that sort of thing, but we do not see any kind of safety of flight issue.
No safety flight, no issue for this mission, nothing that's going to do different.
So it was absolutely noted and studied, but it was determined not to be a safety of flight issue, that it was essentially a maintenance issue.
Et les emails commencent à circuler en interne à la NASA, où les gens, d'un point de vue très affirmatif, disent il n'y a aucune possibilité qu'il y ait un quelconque endommagement de la structure, parce que Cratère a montré qu'il n'y avait aucun risque.
The engineers on the ground were powerless. The only solution would be another shuttle, but it was too late. By the time it arrived, Columbia's crew would be short of oxygen. Above all, most specialists thought there was no risk, and the Columbia astronauts trusted their opinion. January 28, 2003, only 3 days before Columbia's return, astronaut Laurel Clark speaks to her husband and son Ian for the last time.
Our last communication was basically very upbeat, and we're so excited about seeing you in a few days, and it was a really very joyous time to know that they'd be home in a few days. There was never, in my mind, ever like this was going to end in tragedy.
Bye, I love you both. Bye.
Bye.
It's the Bob. Space to Ian. Space to Ian.
Those were Laurel Clark's last words to her 6-year-old son. February 1st, 2003, Columbia prepared to leave its orbit. Landing was scheduled in just over 2 hours. At that time, nobody imagined the worst.
There had never been significant problems on descent.
L'habitude et puis la croyance de l'époque faisait que il n'y avait plus de risque et que 24 heures avant, on pouvait déjà faire la fête.
At Mission Control, Houston, the team in charge of monitoring the shuttle's re-entry settled in. This included a dozen engineers, the flight director, and the one called CAPCOM.
Le CAPCOM, c'est diminutif de capsule communicateur. C'est toujours un astronaute et qui est le seul autorisé à parler à l'équipage.
At 8:10 a.m., he signaled Columbia to begin maneuvers.
Columbia, Houston.
Go ahead, Houston.
Yeah, Rick, you are go for the deorbit burn.
Okay, we copy go for the burn right now.
The deorbit burn is the first stage of re-entry. To leave orbit, Columbia reduces its speed.
Donc on est en marche arrière sur le dos, on allume les moteurs de la navette, on va descendre la vitesse d'environ 120 mètres par seconde. Et une fois que la vitesse a été faite par les moteurs, la navette se retourne pour revenir le nez vers l'avant avec 40 degrés d'incidence.
Elle se met dans une orientation idéale pour la rentrée avec le bon angle par rapport au filet d'air, qui est à peu près de 40 degrés. Elle a une marge de plus ou moins 1 degré. Mais au-delà de 2 degrés, en plus ou en moins, c'est la catastrophe.
If the angle is above 40 degrees, the shuttle will rebound on the atmospheric layers, like a ricochet on water. But if it is inferior to 40 degrees, the orbiter will burn. This angle is governed by onboard computers to ensure precision. For Columbia, at that point, everything was perfectly executed.
Columbia, Houston, good burn, no trim required.
We copy and concur, Houston, thanks.
At 8:44, Columbia entered the first layers of the atmosphere. Inside the vessel, everyone was pretty relaxed.
Can you look at the camera for a second? Look at me. I can see you in your mirror.
Astronaut Laurel Clark filmed the start of the hypersonic descent at over 27,000 kilometers per hour, 12 times the top speed of Concorde.
It was Laurel in the right rear seat of the flight deck who was filming it, and she's talking and they're, you know, almost kind of joking. It's kind of a weird video because, you know, they start seeing the flashes of plasma.
This is the plasma behind the portal. It's superheated air that surrounds the shuttle on re-entry.
Energy from the kinetic energy is converted into heat, so it gets very hot.
Vous êtes dans une boule de feu.
It's a fireball. A fireball as hot as 1,600 degrees on the leading edges of the wings, just where Columbia has a 25-centimeter hole. But the crew are unaware. Commander Rick Husband is enjoying watching the plasma around the spacecraft.
This is amazing. It's really getting fairly bright out there. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be outside now.
He was very secure, and so he was very confident that it was going to go well.
140 kilometers further down in Houston, engineers watch their screens showing all the shuttle's sensors.
At the beginning, there was no indication of a problem.
On voit des voyants s'allumer. Bon, rien de bien méchant. On voit une élévation de température assez faible, de l'ordre de 4 degrés par minute.
But at 8:54, everything changed dramatically. An engineer warns the flight director of several error messages.
FYI, I've just lost 4 separate temperature transducers on the left side of the vehicle, the hydraulic return temperatures.
Un par un, les paramètres tombaient en panne.
And when you say you lost these, are you saying that they went all 4 of them were off scale low or off scale?
It's normal to have maybe 1 or 2 sensors that, you know, give an off-scale reading or an abnormal reading, but to have so many sensors was unprecedented.
And they were all staggered. They were, like I said, within several seconds of each other. Okay.
Et tout ça n'a aucun sens, mais c'est normal parce qu'en fait, tous ces capteurs qui sont à bord de la navette spatiale sont en train de fondre et la navette elle-même est en train de se déformer.
The hot plasma coming through the wing was the functional equivalent of a blowtorch.
The engineers couldn't see that the plasma had entered via the hole in the leading edge. The sensors didn't withstand the heat. But worse, the inner wing was made of aluminum, a material that melts at 600 degrees. The shuttle was due to land in 20 minutes' time. Columbia was flying over the west coast of the United States. Amateur cameramen filmed Columbia's descent.
Oh, it's cool. Oh, that's beauty.
They were the first witnesses to the orbiter's gradual disintegration.
Look at the chunks coming off of it. Yeah. What the heck is that?
I don't know.
Flashes of light were coming off Columbia.
L'aile gauche commence à partir en petits morceaux.
Inside the shuttle, the crew was still unaware of what was happening. The onboard computer registered overheating in the port wing. It then tried to adapt its trajectory.
L'ordinateur a commandé à la navette de se mettre en crabe, comme ça, de façon à protéger l'aile gauche pour qu'elle soit donc à des températures inférieures.
Nothing was working.
Le pilote automatique n'a plus d'autorité. Le pilote automatique dit « j'arrive en butée de mes gouvernes, je ne sais plus faire ».
The temperature in the wing was rising dangerously, causing a devastating chain reaction.
Hi, Max. Go. We just lost tire pressure on left outboard and left inboard, both tires.
There were sensors that indicated during the re-entry that there were, off nominal temperatures throughout the left wing.
Et là, ça commence ce qu'on appelle en aéronautique, on dit qu'on est en train d'allumer le sapin de Noël. Vous avez beaucoup de voyants qui s'allument.
Au sol, ils ont commencé à devenir très inquiets à ce moment-là.
The time was 8:59 a.m. The Capcom contacted the shuttle commander.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages and we did not copy your last.
Roger.
Et puis c'est la rupture. On n'a plus aucun contact.
Columbia, Houston, comm check.
As NASA tried to re-establish communications, the Columbia crew was fighting for survival at over 21,000 kilometers per hour.
There's a procedure for loss of control, and it's to restart the auxiliary power units to get the flight controls back in order.
Et donc à ce moment-là, l'équipage reprend les commandes en manuel.
Willie McCool, who was the pilot, he was activating those switches to restart the auxiliary power units.
Et sans efficacité. Et donc là, il a compris instantanément que c'était perdu.
At the very end, they were test pilots, and they were trying to save their vehicle.
In vain. Eaten away from the inside by flames, the port wing couldn't withstand the enormous aerodynamic forces.
The wing, structurally failed, and so the wing ripped off.
The shuttle went out of control. Mission Control in Houston continued its attempts to contact Columbia.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Over and over, they would try to get a response and only silence.
Columbia, Houston, UHF comm check.
Several kilometers away, amateur cameramen were still filming the shuttle. When suddenly,
pretty quickly the shuttle lost pressurization. And once that happened, the crew lost consciousness. Everything within the shuttle started rocketing around inside before it completely ripped apart and fell to the ground.
the time was 3 seconds past 9. Columbia disintegrated in the sky at an altitude of 60 kilometers. Debris rained down on Texas. Emergency services received a great number of worried calls.
911, what's the exact address of your emergency? Well, I'm standing out here, something fell out of the sky. When? Looked like a little piece of metal.
Il y a des débris énormes qui tombent. Bon, il y a des morceaux de moteur, notamment un qui tombe dans un golfe, des débris massifs.
In Mission Control, the flight director uttered the most feared 3 words at NASA.
GC flight. GC flight. Flight GC. Lock the doors.
On ferme les portes, ça veut dire l'accident est très grave.
Unaware of the tragedy, the families at Cape Canaveral were still waiting for their loved ones to return. Columbia was due to land in 2 minutes, but one detail worried them.
Usually a minute or so before landing, you hear the sonic boom when they come back through the atmosphere. And it's pretty noticeable. It's like a boom. It sounds like a double-barreled shotgun.
And the 2 sonic booms you hear is the nose striking the sound barrier and the tail on the orbiter itself.
And there's no sound. There's no sonic boom, there's nothing. And we're standing there. And then that clock starts counting positive numbers. And I remember Matthew standing by me and he's holding onto my arm and Laura's holding on to me and she said, "Is Daddy okay?" And I had to look into her eyes and tell her, "No, I don't think he is, but I don't know what's happened."
So they rushed us from the landing site to crew quarters.
They were all on their cell phones and everybody was kind of in a panic.
Flight surgeon has an office in crew quarters. I went in there and I turned on the TV and I saw what happened.
And what has happened is what you see here. It broke up into numerous pieces. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 significant streaks there. As you look down there, you can situate.
TV news channels were showing the breakup of Columbia.
And everything seemed to go in slow motion for me. It was just surreal.
It was the worst, I mean, literally the worst day of my life.
My fellow Americans,
This day has brought terrible news and great sadness to our country. At 9 o'clock this morning, Mission Control in Houston lost contact with our Space Shuttle Columbia. A short time later, debris was seen falling from the skies above Texas. The Columbia is lost. There are no survivors.
An unprecedented effort began to recover debris spread over 300 kilometers.
Certainly the largest search ever conducted.
The U.S. Forest Service, other NASA employees, the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, the law enforcement officials in and around Texas, the National Guard units, citizen volunteers.
30,000 people.
The government of the United States paid $300 million to pick up that debris.
6 months later, 82,000 pieces, 40% of the shuttle, were recovered and assembled in a vast hangar for the investigation.
That's a very stark introduction to what we were about because of the force of the impact and the twisted metal. I mean, that was all very emotional.
But one question remained unanswered by the inquest. Could NASA have saved the crew? Had the hole in the wing been detected earlier, would the space agency have had the means to rescue Columbia? Some put forward potential solutions.
They could prepare another shuttle, the Atlantis, to launch and rendezvous with Columbia.
And have the crew come across the tether to the orbiter next to it.
But the chances of success of such an operation remained very low.
That would have been a cool rescue story and, heroes. But the reality is that it would have been really hard.
No one had ever attempted it. There were never two shuttles in space at any time.
What if you lose that shuttle, during the rescue attempt? Then you lost 14 people, not 7.
This accident suspended manned shuttle flights for 18 months. The program resumed with only 1 or 2 flights a year until it finally ended on July 8, 2011.
En fait, l'accident de 2003 sonne comme une confirmation, en réalité, du fait que la navette spatiale doit être remplacée par autre chose.
But the Columbia tragedy was not forgotten. Today, on the 16th floor of a NASA building in Florida, the debris is carefully guarded. It is used to guide the design of rockets of the future.
To build future spacecraft, we've learned from the debris. Where the damage was worse, what didn't survive very well, the forces that were involved, what did survive, things like that.
That's the legacy, the sacrifice that those crew made, that things will be better for the future, that others may live. That's kind of my motto.
A legacy for future generations left by Columbia and her crew. A painful reminder that space travel remains, and will always remain, a high-risk activity where the slightest breakdown can send a spacecraft out of control.